Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Girl Dad Show. Super excited to be back in season 4, and we're going to be changing things up a little bit this season. And one of the main things that we're going to be doing is having monthly, deeper guest interviews. And in addition to that, a topic around parenting and life that I'm going to discuss around in the Girl Dad Talk. So just basically 2 shows a month. And we're going to go to an every other week schedule and just have more deeper topics. And as we started to think about doing it this year, I realized that I talk to Eric a lot about this stuff all the time. He's become my bestie over the last 4 years that I've known him. And I can't even believe it's been that long. But we talk all the time and we text all the time. And it's always around this idea of business life and parenting. And I just thought it'd be really great to be able to banter on these topics with him. And so we're going to try this and see how it goes. But thank you, Eric, for joining me on the Girl Dad Talk.
Thanks for having me back.
All right. So, Eric, this one's a little bit weird because it's not actually an interview. It's just topics. And then we're going to go and discuss it. And it'll be short and quick, hopefully. If it's long, it's long. And we're going to see how this goes. But today we're going to be talking about divorce and just the idea of divorce. And we're just going to banter back and forth about our thoughts around it and what we're noticing about it. But just some stats to kind of kick us off here. Overall divorce rates is growing. And approximately I think it's like 40 it's like 40 something percent of wait, let me just read it out loud. This is so silly of me. I have it right in front of me. The divorce rate in the United States is approximately 2.9 per thousand population, meaning 39% of marriages will end in divorce. And the median duration of marriages that end in divorce around 8 years. And divorce rates are higher for couples in their 20s, with the likelihood of divorce decreasing as couples age. And then the divorce rates are increasing year over year. So let me just bring it up to you. What do you think about this content and this topic? Sorry, not this content, but this topic. And have you noticed it in your life and kind of the people you hang out with?
I'm skimming the stats too that you sent me. What do I think about the content or the topic? I don't know. I don't think I have like a different opinion or a particularly well developed opinion. So I guess we'll see where it goes. I have not noticed it in my life. I know that you said that there's been some divorce in your life, or like in your peer group. And I was talking to Melody about this, and I was like, I don't think we know anyone in our peer group or our friend circle that is divorced or seems to be on that path. Though, I mean, I guess the stats say that I'm probably going to be running to it soon.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I've noticed it a lot more in the last year. And I mean, we're probably 2 terrible people to be talking about this because we're neither one of us are going through it. But I feel like through proxy, I'm experiencing the aftermath of it, right? Talking to a lot of dads that are going through it and or have gone through it recently. But it's been kind of a bigger topic over the last year, and just having a lot of friends and connections that are going through it. And it's hard. It's super, super hard to talk to them about it and try to empathize because I don't understand, but I can imagine. And it's got to be really, really, really challenging. And yeah, it's so good that you haven't really experienced it in a sense because I think it is very draining for you as a friend to know that your friends are hurting and in pain. But I also think that it's like in the macro really good for them. Because when I do talk to them about why they're doing it, what's happening, what's next, it seems like it's the right thing to do. And it seems like it's the right thing to do for themselves and also inevitably for their kids and family.
Ooh, I have a thing where, I'm thinking about this now, and I don't have anyone in my close friend circle, but now that you mentioned, I do have, people I've met or whatever. You meet someone at like a happy hour or like a networking thing, and when people say like, "Oh, I'm getting divorced" or something like that, I do have like one standard policy, which is like I almost always, and this is probably the wrong move. I almost always say, "Oh, congratulations," or
Mm-hmm.
I'll ask like, "Oh, how do you feel about it?"
Mm-hmm.
Because I think there's like this default reaction, which is, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that." And one time I heard this a long time ago, but someone said, "No happy marriages end in divorce." And like
Mm-hmm.
framed through that lens, it's like divorce is almost always the right move when it's happening. And so
Mm-hmm.
I've kind of adopted the stance where I will often say congratulations. And now that I'm reflecting on it, I maybe don't like that move. I may be like, okay, how do you feel about that? Because like once you're at that divorce point, it's almost certainly something where both parties, or at least one party, is like seriously unhappy.
Yeah.
I don't know. I
Yeah. Yeah, I think that for me, there's like two aspects to it when I think about it. And one is this concept that like kids, no matter what you say to them, kids will react to how you are and who you are way more than anything you'll say to them. And I'm a walking victim of this because I try to teach my kids to be kind and nice and generous, and I say that to them, but apparently I don't act it because they act like me versus they don't do what I do. They don't do what I say. They do what I do, right? And so I'm actively trying to like exude a more calmer and generous personality trait so that they can exude that as well, because
mm,
I'm seeing that they watch me way more than they listen to me. And I think at the end of the day, when I think about like being in an unhappy relationship or a relationship that doesn't work, I don't want them to feel like they have to commit to that to not be happy. I'd rather them focus on being happy and doing what's right for them, because just like I've evolved so much, almost every 10 years, I'd say, but like I've evolved so much over the last like different chapters in my life. And I'm a completely different person than I was when I was in my 30s. And I'm a completely different person than I was in my 20s. The way that I think, the way that I act, the way that I operate. And so it's kind of crazy to even think that like you would try to make it like perfectly match and evolve at the same time at the same stage, because that person is also evolving and changing as the different chapters in life. So I just feel like it's a lot like, gosh, I hate to bring this back to business, but when I think about it like business, it's like the co-founder stigma, right? When the company outpaces that co-founder, do you just keep letting the company stunt or not grow because that person can't keep up with the new stage of the company, or do you have that hard conversation and you break up that quote unquote marriage, right? And you move on. It's kind of the same dilemma for me. It's the only parallel that I can pull from. And I just feel like, in business, you want to do what's right for the business and you and the person, right? And so if that doesn't make sense, it's an objective decision. And although it's mired in a lot of emotions, it is an objective decision. And I feel like it's the same for marriage. And the biggest thing, sorry, and I know you have a couple of things you want to say
no,
right
no, no.
now,
I
but
I'm just like following your thread. Keep going.
the biggest thing that I'm like thinking about right now is because I just interviewed somebody, a venture capitalist, that he brought his daughter on the show, and they basically were. I interviewed the dad and the daughter at the same time, and she and him did not talk for like 3 or 4 years because she was so upset with the divorce and how she perceived it and how angry she was at the dad. And then
Oh
they
yeah.
reconnected almost 4 years later after she became an adult, and they talked about like the the perception from the kid's point of view. And it was like amazing for me to think about, because I'm always thinking about it from a very forest point of view, right? Like long term, objectively, you want to show the kid that you got to be happy and personally happy. You also got to see like, is this partnership working? And then if it's not going to work, or because one side's unhappy or both sides are unhappy, then you have to fix that. But then I never really thought about it from the kid's point of view, right? And so being able to interview
Yeah,
that young lady about her experience was really really interesting for me.
yeah.
So that's kind of like some of the thoughts that I have right now about it.
Wait, so just out of curiosity, like what did she say, and what did you get from her?
She was really angry. She was very very angry, to the point where she blamed her dad for choosing to start a business and be entrepreneurial, because he
Mm.
you know got an itch and he calmed down to be a good dad, a good executive job, and then he couldn't not live his life anymore. And so he was so unhappy that he decided to become a venture capitalist and start going to start his own fund and start his own business. And then that enveloped his life, and then it became more risky again, and all the things that come with being an entrepreneur. And then that put a lot of strain on the relationship, which inevitably led to divorce. Obviously it's way more complicated than that, but that's
Sure,
just like
sure.
the high level bullets. And um, it had nothing to do with the daughter per se, right? Like it wasn't her
Right.
fault, the kid's fault, or anything. It was just the guy just wanted to follow his dream, and he took a sacrifice to raise his family and do what he thought was right in the stage of life.
But ultimately, the daughter sounds like they
Oh wait, I can't
reconciled,
hear you.
right? And
Oh,
oh, can you hear me? So, like, ultimately, the daughter
I can hear you
and the
now. Yeah.
dad reconciled, right? So, like, what changed in her mind that brought her back to him, where she no longer felt, or maybe maybe she still feels like it was his fault and she still did something bad. But like, how do they come back to
Yeah. I
talking
mean,
again? And then what's her view now?
yeah. I mean, there. like it's kind of weird because you haven't heard the interview yet because we're recording
Mhm.
this in advance. But yeah, you got to listen to the whole interview so you can get it from the horse's mouth. But long story short is that he the dad kept reconnecting and trying, and then
Okay.
inevitably they started reconnecting when she was older and she was basically
Yeah.
in postgraduate school. And I think it's just her stages in life let her open back up to it, and now they're really close and they're very comfortable talking about it. It seems like they have a very healthy relationship because they definitely are very comfortable talking about what bothered them and all of those things. But you can obviously tell they care about each other deeply, right? Like it's obvious, even though they're still working through, their upset, anger, fear, insecurities, all those things. They're talking about all of it. You could tell. So it was a really cool story and interview. But it's kind of what prompted this topic, right? The kickoff to this new season is like, what does divorce do for the kid, and just thinking about it because for me, I don't I've I typically don't really. I feel like it's weird because there's a stigma around it, but I don't really feel like there is a stigma. I don't think it's that big of a deal, to be honest. I mean, I guess it's a big deal, but
Yeah.
there's a really big stigma around it. But I do think that, like, I think of it like a partnership, and I think of it like a business partnership. Um, it is, and you have to kind of constantly keep resetting that and setting expectations.
So I really love the story about like the dad and the daughter and the divorce, and I think the dad and the daughter story is kind of like this like a similar metaphor for like how relationships and divorce actually happen too. Where like the two threads I want to pull on are one like short term pain versus long term pain, or like short term pleasure versus long term pleasure, and the
Yeah,
other one is just like trying hard in that relationship. So going backwards, that trying hard in that relationship, I think it's so easy. And I don't know it as much in marriages, but human relationships or dating or romantic relationships are, you know, really similar. But like I think it's so easy to give up. It's so easy to give up on a relationship. And this dad could have very easily been like, okay, she hates me, I'm out. Right. Or like,
hmm
I'll try to connect, 3 or 4 times. And if she says no, then, clearly it's dead. But it was important to him. So he kept investing. And then eventually that relationship came back. I think that can be true in like a romantic relationship or dating or a friendship. And sometimes I think that um, like you have to be able to have someone could bridge that gap, right? And that connection.
yeah,
And in a great relationship, you'd imagine that everybody's trying 50-50, but like it could be 90-10 or like 100-0. And the person on the other side has to be receptive, but you need both sides to make that connection, right? And it sounds like the dad in this case was like, okay, I care about this, so I'm going to keep investing, and maybe like the tenacity to keep investing in the face of all evidence that it'll never work. And sometimes I think that'll change the outcome. And I think that can be true for divorce. I think like relationships are really really hard, and Melody and I have a kid, and we're having another kid, and I'm sure it won't be always smooth sailing, and there'll be times when we misunderstand each other or we get upset at each other, and it'd be so easy to be like, well, you know what, like everybody's one right swipe away from like one other person. But I think that like even in those moments when you're like, okay, like this kind of sucks, and there will almost certainly be a time when like your relationship will suck or my relationship will suck, but then like are you prepared to like take that step to try to bridge that gap? And like
hmm
this dad, it sounds like, did that. And I think probably all relationships dissolve when somebody is no longer willing to make that step.
yeah. I totally agree with it, and I think that there's a lot of layers to this too because like when you think about trying to make those steps is um, could be one sided and lopsided and stuff. But I go back to the whole concept of like trying first and foremost, but then making it objective because there are times where you can't make something work because people evolve or the situation changes or the world changes and times change, and I think that you can try your best to make it work, and sometimes you have to try harder, and sometimes it's equal. But um, I guess from my point of view, I feel like at the end of the day, like they're also watching how you're. If the goal is to raise good kids and the goal is to be happy and all those other things, then you want to be happy because then you're going to raise kids that strive for being happy, right?
Totally
And I guess the
separate
reason why I say
questions.
it, yeah,
Like
the reason
to
why I
me those
say
are
that is
separate
because
questions.
for
Like the
me,
continuity of the relationship is one thing, right? And
yeah,
like relationships will dissolve if you quit or whatever and all that kind of stuff. Like, and even just one person quitting can be enough to break up a relationship. um,
totally,
That
Totally.
said, I don't think continuity is necessarily the end all be all, the single value to optimize for, right? But
Yeah.
I do think if you are trying to hold that marriage together, somebody's got to try. But I think you're bringing up another point, which is like, hey, imagine you're in this situation where one person's only giving 2% and the other person's trying to give 100%. Um, and so it's like just not coming together. Then you're right. You're going to model this kind of like adversarial relationship, one person serving another, like not a particularly healthy relationship. So you could, let's say, save the marriage at the cost of, modeling an unhealthy relationship for your children.
Yeah, for a prolonged period of time. And so then it's a matter of figuring out how long is a good amount of time to try that. Because I think there's some nobility in that as well too. But I also feel like at the end of the day, I don't want to model that behavior either, right? Because
Totally.
that's also really hard. It kind of goes back to something really trivial, but like, and again, this is my personal experience of divorce. I've never been divorced, but when you break up with the girlfriend, growing,
It's like me
especially
and
like
you are like two not
after you're in your
divorced guys
20s.
talking about divorce.
Yeah, I know it's the worst people to talk about this topic, or
No,
maybe
but
it's the
I think
best. I'm not
divorce
sure.
divorce is just like
Yeah.
it's like all human relationships, like friendships, relationships, like co-founder relationships. They have these elements of like, basically two souls connecting or two people connecting for a thing. Like the fact that the topic is like, let's say romantic or like whatever. I think there are enough through lines between those things that we can understand that. And obviously there's different components that you have to consider with a marriage because you have like children or whatever, and you might have other values around that. So,
Yeah,
I like to
totally.
joke.
For me, I just think this is a little bit anomalous. But my experience is like when I break up with the girlfriend, when I broke up with the girlfriend, I tried and tried really hard. I tried really hard to maintain the relationship. And the thesis behind it is that which is weird, right? I know that's super odd because it's not normal, but I think the thesis behind it is like you cared enough to build a relationship and commit and sacrifice for, in my case, years, right? Because
Mhm.
almost all my girlfriends I dated for years. And so if you're going to commit years to this relationship and this person, there's obviously some merit and quality and goodness in there, right? And so all of a sudden, because you've evolved or they've evolved or things don't match up or things change, you're gonna like throw those years away. It just seems weird because it's like, gosh, I hate this. I'm really trivializing this. We're gonna get reamed when people listen to this, but it's a lot like what I
You're
learned
gonna
at
get
Apple,
reamed.
right? So I'm gonna get
I'm just
reamed, yeah,
kidding. I'm just
because I'm
kidding.
trivializing divorce to like Apple. But like when I was at Apple, they did this whole clap out thing, where when you would leave the company, they celebrated you for leaving. It was like it's considered a tour of duty. They expected you to leave. They knew that you were gonna leave, and so when you left, they stopped serving customers. Everyone stopped working for like 5 minutes, and they just like clapped while you walked out of the office. It was kind of this like celebratory thing saying thank you for your service.
Mm.
Go ahead and go on, and that kind of permeated through my mind because what it did was it made me understand that like we at Apple we spent so much time interviewing and re-interviewing and making sure doing background checks and checking that they were high quality, they were culture fits, they had background references. Like we spent so much time to find these great people, and then we spent so much time training them. I mean, the training programs were so massively excessive, right? Like investing so much into their onboarding and training. And so it's like, yeah, like we have invested so much to make sure that we brought some of the best people that we could bring into the company. Why wouldn't we celebrate them on their way out? They did good, whether their times have changed or their stages have changed. We celebrate them on their way out. And it sounds so lame because I'm using this to talk about divorce now, but that's what kind of influenced me to think about my relationships that way. Because if I spend so much time to like find this person that I think that I can marry, and I develop that relationship and I try to work towards that, is this the person that I think I can marry and spend the rest of my life with, trying to figure all those things out? You're committing and spending so much energy doing that discovery work, doing that assessment, doing that training, doing that learning, doing all those things. Like if it doesn't work out, like why would you just throw that away? You should celebrate it. And so for me, it's always been like, how can I retain as much of this relationship as possible and create that kind of symmetry, right? Like across the board. Obviously, it doesn't work because it's highly emotional, but I have tried, and I am fairly good friends with most of my exes.
Oh wow, I love that story. I didn't think that was going to end in I'm fairly good friends with most of my exes.
Yeah.
Does Amy know your exes? Like, what to say more? Do you guys go on family vacations with them?
Well, the funny thing is,
Like,
like,
how good friends?
well, there was one point where Amy came to me. I think it was like 2 or 3 years in. She's like, "Hey, my ex is throwing a party. I want to go. I just wanted to make sure you knew that it was my ex, and are you okay with that?" And this and that. And I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Are you serious? Like, you don't care?" And I'm like, "No, not. Of course I don't care. You're like Facebook friends with my exes. You've already hung out with them multiple times." And she's like, "Oh wait, what?" And like, from my point of view, I didn't really think of it to tell her or even have to question it. I just assumed it was okay. And so there was kind of a funny point in our relationship. It's a funny way of kind of sharing the story, but
Awesome.
yeah, I think that it's just like goes back to the respect thing, right? It's like you cared about this person. In my opinion, you cared about this person, so it's just like the line. What is that saying? The line between love and hate is just like paper thin, or whatever that saying is.
I don't know that saying.
Oh, you don't know that saying?
Um,
I gotta Google it. But there's a saying that says like love and hate are very very similar, and it's just a matter of like trying to be able to like
yeah.
temper your emotions to do it. Again, I've never been divorced. I don't know how bad it is because if you put my kids involved and you put all these, I'm sure I would like lose my objectivity. But at the end of the day, I feel like it can be done in a very productive manner, and
Yeah.
in a good manner.
So I have one good friend who uh, he's divorced, and they got divorced forever ago. And so I just didn't really think about it when you were talking about recent divorces, but so he married a girl that he had known since high school. They weren't really close. Then they both moved to Chicago. They got married. They were together, and honestly, what happened was they just became different people. And so she's like, you know, he was a trader. She worked in art, and they like doing like fancy dinners and restaurants and whatever and all that kind of stuff. And then over time, like she was still that person. She kept getting like more and more into it. She worked for Sotheby's, and then he was kind of like, wait, I don't see the meaning and the value in this. And he was like, you know. His perfect weekend was waking up early on a Saturday morning, going for a 100-mile run, and then just like eating a bunch of steaks. And like he didn't want to go out to restaurants, and they just had different interests.
Yeah,
And that was really interesting because like they were similar people with similar interests, and like people are going to change over time, right? And so they kind of just like started diverging, and it was really really clear. And um, I love them because they basically just had a grown up conversation about it. They're like, hey, you and I were not the same people that we were. I don't think that this is going in the right place anymore.
mm,
And so they were like, they made a mutual decision to separate. They didn't have kids, which made it a lot easier. Um,
yeah.
but like they're really good friends to this day. Like they talk like every week, whatever. Like when he goes to New York, he stays with her. Um,
Oh
and
wow.
they both have separate families and kids. But it was just this thing where they're like kind of maybe sort of reflecting on the phrase the tour of duty for Apple is like he's like, hey, we did this thing and we were certain people at this time, and we've evolved to become the next versions of ourselves, and we just didn't evolve together. She was like, there was no version of her that she was going to be like, I'm super excited about camping this weekend. And so they just grew
Yeah,
apart. And I think when you
yeah,
can have that rational conversation about that, and it's less about ego, and you don't feel, it doesn't feel personal to you. You just realize that like you grow, and sometimes you grow in different directions. Like that could be like a really
yeah.
amicable way to do that.
I'll tell you right now, I can see how it happens though, right? Because like I think the it's really cool that they were able to do that, but I do think that it's even harder once you have kids because
100%.
um, I feel like the relationship is so strained after the kids come in. I mean, like Amy and I used to like fight, but we would never fight. Like, but now we're like now there's like genuine like it was like stupid fights, right? Like you said this and it made me feel such and such. Now it's like it's because you have so little time. You have so little time for each other. And so you have to bank on the trust of the relationship before that stage of kids, or at least when they're younger, right? Because in the stage that I'm at with my kids, all the time gets sucked up by the kids that's available, right? And so now you're putting this new evolution to the relationship where it used to be one and two, and now there's like in our case, 1, 2, and then 3 and 4, right? And then these people have these emotions, and they're part of the journey, and they're starting to have their own interest, and they take up time. And so inevitably, like, what happens is Amy and I end up sacrificing our relationship for this bigger ecosystem, because time has to come from somewhere. And so what used to be huge bonuses, like, because very similarly, kind of made me think about Amy and I. We don't like the same stuff. In all respects, we shouldn't be together. We're like almost polar opposites. You know, she I like nice and fancy things, right? I like to go whatever. She likes to camp, and she likes to do manual labor, and I don't know why I'm saying it that way.
I
She
can
likes
introduce her
to
to Matt.
yeah. Thanks. She likes to garden and being outdoors, right? She likes to hike and all those other things. And I mean, I'll do it, and because I appreciate the fact that I don't know it, I don't understand it, and I care about her, so it's important to me. But that whole concept of like making the compliments augment is a matter of like time and effort, right? So otherwise those disinterests can, I mean, it becomes a negative. And so we have to actively work to remind ourselves that this is a partnership, and even though we're not spending that time together, or we're spending a lot less time together, that we're building something for a family and for our kids in this stage of life. And I truly believe that, and I talk to Amy about this all the time. I just tell her, I'm like, I know it's not as great, I know it's not as great as it used to be, and I know that we've changed and evolved, but you also got to imagine that like these kids are going to become more independent too. like eventually, I mean, look at Lily. She can like brush her own teeth and wipe her own butt, like eventually Grace will be like that. And so some of this like manual stuff will go away, right? And so they'll start to become more independent, and then supposedly when they're 14 or 15, they don't even want to hang out with us anyways. So like, well, if we could just wait like
Yeah.
5 more years in this stage of life, we'll get that time back, and we can go back to working on ourselves and spending the time together. In my mind, that's how I think about it, because the reality is that we are changing and evolving, both her and I. And um uh and there's no doubt about that we're growing up, we're getting older, we're pushing 50, right? We have to evolve, right? Our body doesn't work well, our minds are changing, the way we perceive the world is changing, all those things are changing. But simultaneously, our time is just completely washed out. We have no time.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
there's no time to like do those things. And like, I don't know, like my biggest concern is that I'm, you know um not putting enough in that jar, in that balance jar, right, of the
Mhm.
things that you need in life. And that can put a lot of pressure to it. But I think that that's inevitably what happens, is that you have this massive shift. It's not this like chapter change in your life, it's like this massive shift in time, and no one prepare you can't prepare for it. You can't prepare for kids. It just hits you, no matter how much you understand it, how much people tell you about it. It's just you'll never expect it, you'll never be prepared for it.
Yeah, I definitely agree that you can't be prepared for the kids thing. Um, I have you heard of? Do you know who Esther Perel is?
Mm-mm.
Esther Perel, um, she I think is like a therapist, like a Belgian therapist or something like that. But she talks a lot about infidelity. So there's a couple of podcasts, or not podcasts. Well, I think she has a podcast too. There's a couple of TED talks where she talks about infidelity, and sort of like acting as a couples therapist for couples who have experienced infidelity. And I, I just thought about this, but one thing she talks about is she says like every 10 years your relationship is different, or something like that. Basically, like you will be in a new relationship after X years. Whether it's with the same person or not is up to you. And um, I think like there's this one romantic idea of marriage being like, I got together with my 18-year-old sweetheart, and then like we just like took it all the way to like our deathbed. um, but if instead you think about it sort of like this, like the ship of Theseus, you're replacing planks along the way. Like every single plank in the boat is different, but is it still the same boat? Maybe yes, maybe no. Um, I think when you talk about how like you were different in your 20s than your 30s, and different in your 30s than your 40s, I think that's kind of the analogy. Like Amy today is, first of all, a different person, but she's married to a different person today too than the one she actually
Yeah,
married, right?
that's right.
And
Yep.
like you have this stimulus that enters the relationship, which is like children, right? Which accelerates this change in who you are as a person, and also like what your value systems are and what things you're optimizing for. Because to your point, yeah, like when you're 20, yeah, you want like fancy cars and nightclubs and whatever, all that kind of stuff. But then, I think you and I are at a stage in our life where like, okay, we're optimizing for like if you're optimizing for, hey, I am really looking forward to what my adult children will be like, then whatever pain you're experiencing today is just like part of this short-term pain that you are willing to not just endure, but like maybe this short-term pain that you have to experience in order to get to the longer-term pleasure. And then like seeing through that larger arc, I think it makes it really, really easy, right?
Mm,
But 23-year-old you could have never made that choice. Like you were just a different person. And so I think there's some luck to the whole marriage thing, right? Like even if you start as value aligned, similar people, these stimulus can drive you off course, which is like, my friend Matt and his wife, like just becoming different people. Or they can drive
yeah.
you together. And I think like the question sort of at all of these forks in the relationship are like, okay, well, is this stimulus going to bring you closer together or bring you further apart? And it's not as simple as just like closer or further. It's like this multi-dimensional problem. You're closer in some ways, further in others. And then whether or not at every step you still think that like you're trying to go to the same place. Or to a place that you both want to go to. It doesn't have to necessarily be the same place, but like something that you're supporting for each other.
Yeah, totally. I think that this is all kind of like um subjective and relative, but it sounds like she's actually studied this though, and she's a doctor, she's an
I think
expert
that's
in
what
this.
she is. Like, I'll send you
Yeah,
the TED
yeah,
talks. Are
please,
10 minutes
please,
each.
please.
It,
Yeah.
it focuses on like sort of this idea of infidelity, but when she it's like probably one soundbite where she's like, look, you know, like it's basically the idea that you will be with a different person in 10 years, whether it's like the same individual or like a totally different individual, but like it'll be a different person.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. I think that like I I can completely and confidently say that I've evolved, and I'm a very different person than I was even 10 years
For
ago.
the better or for the worse?
I don't
Just
know. Yeah, you're gonna have to
kidding.
ask. You're gonna have to ask my kids and Amy, I guess, because those are the people's opinion that I care about. But um, that's a really good point. Actually, I should probably ask them. Is it better
Ooh,
for the worse? But
take uh, um, kicking us off, of course, for a second. Think about your dad.
yeah,
Like your dad and like what what you guys have talked about in the last like year or two versus like a decade ago, like or 2 decades ago. I bet you look at your dad and you think he's a different person. And not only that, he's trying to get different things out of his relationship with you.
oh my God, he's wildly different. Yeah, it's wildly different. I mean, I think he was even just 10. Yeah, that's a great point. Even 10 years ago, he would be, talking about, just being tough and striving for what you want, and being a good, just being a good, community member, right? Good member in society, a good productive member in society. And he was really, really like saying things that surrounded that core concept of like, be a good worker, contribute well to the community, contribute well to the world, like create, provide for your family, and be honorable essentially, and try to like live a righteous life. But um it's kind of funny because now he's in a different stage. He's wildly different. I mean, he's in like time stage, time and value stage, right? He just wants to optimize for time with kids, but not just time with kids, but like what is he doing with them, like physically? Like, can he actively follow them around? Can he like pick them up? Can he go swimming with them? Like, can he do these things? Because I think his physical body is starting to, ail, and he's looking at it more in the sense of like um that time lost versus that time available, and kind of doing that resource allocation. And it's really crazy. I hate that you brought that up because it's making me cry. Yeah, it's been really emotional for me the last few weeks. I just went on a family reunion with them, and I've just been thinking a lot about it. Some of the comments that he says and the things that he talks about are, just really around like this new stage in life that he's in, and how he's optimizing for, not necessarily his health. He's optimizing really for like, he's kind of embraced the fact that he's, mortal, and he's going through that phase, right? And I don't even know what that looks like when we get to that point, but and he's looking at it more like, okay, so conservative have this much time left, aggressively have this much time left. How do I want to spend that time? And it's really, really interesting. I mean, it's fascinating to think about. But for me personally, I think about it like, dang, it sucks because he can't even golf anymore. You know, like I've been, and you know this because we've talked about it, but I've wanted to. I've been practicing golfing for the last year, and I wanted to spend more time with him doing
Mhm.
qualitative stuff, right? Things that he enjoyed, and in some ways it makes me really sad because I may have worked too much and may have spent too much time working because I didn't do it soon enough or I didn't spend enough time to do it. But yeah, we probably won't be golfing together, and it's not a big deal, but it is just kind of makes me sad because that was my thesis and plan, right? And just is what it is.
I, so I love looking at older people
Yeah,
and using them as a model for like, okay, what are the things that I should be doing today? And that hasn't always been true, but I think I'm old enough now that I can look back at my 25-year-old self and be like, oh, those things that I thought were so right then, I now see how dumb I was. And it took me being old enough to see that phase to
yeah,
understand that, oh, life is in phases. And
yeah,
therefore also understanding that, like, you know, like 60-year-olds and 70-year-olds can probably look at me today and be like, oh God,
yeah,
that fucking idiot. He's just like
yeah.
missing the boat. Right.
That's right.
And then like, I've met old people like 75-year-olds, 80-year-olds, whatever, old people who are really, really happy and those who aren't.
Oh
And
wow.
and I'm like, I I know which one I want to end up as. And I I'm so interested in like studying them, learning from them to try to make the right moves today. Because I think if I had advised 25-year-old me, I could have advised myself differently. And the truth is, 25-year-old me would never have listened.
Yeah,
And now I have enough reps of seeing older people and knowing that they actually do have wisdom that I don't have or can't have until I've gotten there. That like I'm a lot more inclined to possibly listen.
yeah,
And I think this is also the case for like marriages and stuff. You see, like, I don't have a lot of friends who are at divorce stage, but I look at some of them and I'm like, are you really happy? Like,
mm,
like I think there's a lot of reasons why people do stay together. They there's like, you said there's not as much of a cultural stigma. There's still some, and the work of divorce and like, you know, I think we have a lot emotionally invested in marriage as well, right? Like you feel like you made a choice, and divorce means that that choice became wrong, right? And
mm.
we don't want to be wrong, right? So I think that like today when I look at like happy relationships, I want to see what I can do to emulate those. But also it's important, I think for me at least, when I evaluate them to be like, okay, do I even want the outcome they have? Right? Because, you know, you could imagine a couple that stays together because they've just chosen to stay together. And like, it's like, you can
Mm.
find some sort of happinesses, but it also makes other choices about your life, right? Like,
Yeah,
like I think you and I, we want to also, do all these other things. Or actually, let's go back to the guy you interviewed example where he's like, okay, I want to be an investor or a founder or something like that. And that takes a toll and there's a cost, right? And an
totally.
easy way to have kept the relationship, the marriage would be like, I'll sacrifice a part of myself,
Yep.
right? And I think if you have to make that trade, you're like, okay, personal integrity, like uphold my own, personal values to myself, versus sort of like for the greater good or for the marriage or whatever. Like when those came at odds with with each other, he chose. He was like, I can't not be me,
Yeah.
right? And I think not everyone's wired in that way, right? So like if for example you weren't the kind of person ever who wanted to be an entrepreneur, then it would be so easy to make the choice to stay in the marriage, right? Because you're
Hmm.
giving up almost nothing. But if that's so core to your personality that you basically would be a shell of yourself if you abandoned your entrepreneurial venture in order to save the marriage, then you're really doing nobody a service. And so I think
Yeah.
it's so much of a personal choice, and you have to be able to like be introspective enough to look at who am I and what are these things that I have to sacrifice in order to get that possible outcome.
Yeah. So good. I'm really excited, and I'm kind of laughing, smirking right now because this is exactly why I wanted to do this with you because I already knew that these weren't going to be quick. So the team was like, "Hey, maybe we could just give you guys a topic. You guys could talk for 15 minutes." So I'm like, I know Eric and I are going to like talk about it for hours because we always have an intellectual sparring, and I love that about you because you really think through things and kind of like walk down walk down the aisle with it and kind of really double click and everything. But I want to bring us back up because I do want to keep this tight,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
we can wrap it up with that. But that was a really good close. I like that last statement, and I actually had a lot of fun. This was really great. I'm excited to get to know you better this way. Eric. I'm
Perfect. Let's
excited
do
to,
it.
yeah, it'll be fun to talk about these weird topics together and just kind of just banter about it and see what comes out, but also learn from each other because I feel like these are really interesting topics that I've never talked about, and well, at least this one is. And I know the team is excited about giving us random topics to talk about. So, for everyone that's listening, I apologize in advance because neither Eric or I are divorced and we have experience in it. But these are just our opinions, and hopefully, it was interesting for you and helpful. But I do want to say, Eric, thank you again for doing this, man. This was awesome, and dude, I love you so much, man. This is so great.
Yeah, dude. Super fun. All right. Enjoy the
Yeah,
rest of your
hey,
weekend.
I will. I will. Actually, we should talk about. We should pre-plan and schedule one about communal living because
Oh
you
my
and I
gosh,
talk
I'm
about this.
obsessed. It's like my number one obsession.
We should
So,
talk about communal living, and then subset categories. We should talk about multi-generational living,
so into it.
homeschooling.
So into it.
So we'll talk about all those things.
Some of these are going to be easier. Homeschool is going to be so easy.
You think so?
Look, the hardest questions I think are the ones where there's no right answer. I'm
Yeah,
not
like
saying that homeschooling
divorce.
has a yeah. Divorce is personal, right?
Yeah.
Like it's situational. Like look, all of the interesting and hard things in life, the real answer is always it depends. And
Yeah.
anytime
Yeah.
it depends, then you have to be like, okay, well, if X, if Y, if Z, and then like all these things naturally descend from it. But I don't know. Some stuff is like, should I eat healthy food? Nobody's like, oh, let me make the case for McDonald's, right? And those are really short topics.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. That's good. So I'm excited to do these it depends conversations with you. It'll be fun.
Awesome.
All right, Eric. Thank you.
See you, Jan.